Now, getting back over to this war fever that's out there, and it is rather amazing. I'm talking around here to more and more people about, we're in World War III. At war in 10 countries on 2 continents, that's technically a world war. It hasn't gone nuclear yet, and the media is still trying to treat it like it's just really an awful lot of police actions. But it's a world war, and somebody was asking, why are you leaving Hawaii? It's so beautiful and everything. Well, it used to be before TSA destroyed the place, but the main reason we're leaving is, if Obama succeeds in triggering a war with Iran, we could be at war with Russia and China. They really do have nuclear weapons, and because there are so many nuclear weapons on this forward base called the Great Battleship Hawaii, this place is going to disappear in a blinding white flash of light. And I was talking to somebody at the office supply place earlier today about this, and they said, "Oh, don't be silly. Nobody's going to attack Hawaii." And I said, over in that harbor, we got this sunken battleship called the USS Arizona that says otherwise. We do get attacked, as the entree to these world wars, and it can happen again. Most people don't know about it. This series of islands got fought over a lot, and not just by Kamehameha. The British came in, then the Russians tried to take it, then the British conquered it again, then they gave it back, and they said, "We're sorry, we didn't mean to do that." And that's when the kings and queens of Hawaii and the British royalty got to be such good friends. And then, of course, we had the American invasion. And then the Japanese bombed the place, and the Americans are still in charge. There's no place on earth that is going to be safe if this world war goes completely hog wild. And the reason I am so opposed to this is the United States of America cannot sustain and support a new world war. We don't have the people, we don't have the money, we don't have the manufacturing. That last one is the real critical aspect. They're already buying a lot of their weapons and supplies from other countries who are already getting nervous about all the money that the U.S. government owes them that they can't seem to come up with. And so the U.S. is going to lose this war. Now, to the bankers who are loaning the money all over the place, they don't care which side wins and which side loses because everybody goes into debt. That's the purpose of war, is to drive us all back into debt to the bankers. That's the only purpose of war. That's why they don't care who wins or loses. It's all about enslaving us to debt, whether we're nations or individuals. That's the sole agenda for these wars. Get you back in debt. Keep you in debt for the next 6, 7 generations. But on the day the United States understands and comprehends they cannot win this new world war, that's when they're going to start turning the keys on those little nuclear weapons that they've got stashed away. Remember, the United States is the biggest nuclear power on Earth. And so when I say we're going to lose this next world war, we're going to lose it one of 2 ways. It's going to be lost militarily, or they're just going to blow the whole place up. There is no victory possible, no matter how many Rush Limbaughs are out there screaming that, yes, this is a tremendous victory, and it doesn't matter that we lied to start the war because the victory erases everything. And then you realize, what did we actually win? How did this war in Iraq make the United States a better, safer, more prosperous nation? And the answer is it didn't. I have to put up this article that I wrote a while back called Majestic Memories, and it's about this movie called The Majestic, one of Jim Carrey's first films where he's trying not to be the rubber-faced funny man. And I admired him for having the courage to step out of type, and I really liked the movie for reasons that'll be obvious. I'm going to put this up and let you guys read it for yourself. I don't need to go into it on the radio show. But we're in this very, very scary situation where you have all these sociopaths who've got these very comfortable bunkers. Remember, Dick Cheney built a new bomb bunker under the vice president's mansion. So they can push a button and skedaddle down there, and they got all this food stockpiled and all these really cool drugs and, a really good Blu-ray collection that they can just occupy themselves with for the next several, years, while the rest of us are up here dying of germs or radiation or who knows what. And they don't care. The idea is we're going to roll the dice, and as long as we come up to an American world, it'll have been worth it. And you heard, if you were listening to Rush Limbaugh this morning, you heard the same thing. It was all worth it because we won. What did we win? Doesn't matter. We won. That's all that counts. We can claim the victory. Well, in Fallujah, they're burning the American flag, and they're saying they won because the U.S. had to leave. So the victory is very thin and very illusory, if you will, because normally the winners in a war basically get to stay, and we didn't. Now, Leon Panetta, after all the embarrassment over this drone issue in Iran, Leon Panetta said, yeah, we're still going to be flying drones over Iran. That's a military aircraft, and that's somebody else's country. That is an act of war. We're already committing acts of war against Iran. Let's see. Alrighty, we're coming up to the top of this hour here. Some other stories we're going to get out of the way before we get into hour number 2. Over in Israel, this is Christmas time for all you Christians. And for all you Christian Zionists who are convinced that supporting Israel is going to get you a free ride to heaven when you die. A little side note, over in Israel, in Nazareth, the mayor has banned all public display of Christmas trees. You're not allowed to have them on public view in Nazareth. Okay? Now, this would be like here in the United States of America going around and saying that you cannot publicly display a menorah. Can you imagine the fury that would come out of the American media and Abe Foxman at the ADL? If anybody stood up and said, I don't want to see a Star of David, or I don't want to see a menorah, or any of that other stuff, they'd go crazy with anger. And they would be justified in doing so. Because this is a nation built on the premise of freedom of religion, which means everybody gets to have the decorations they choose. And I'm so glad this year that we got away from that nonsense of saying, you can't say Merry Christmas, you must say Happy Holidays, because you don't want to offend the Israelis. Well, I'm sorry. Christmas is the holiday I was raised with. And I'm glad we got away from that this year. And everybody's out there saying, yeah, Merry Christmas, it's cool. We got our identity back. But over in Israel, in this one town, they're banning the Christmas trees. And I just wanted to point it out for all of you Christian Zionists. Israel demands a lot of loyalty and support and respect from you, and it's a one-way street. You don't get it back. Now, this is a segue into this continuing kerfuffle over Newt Gingrich's attempt to claim that the Palestinian people who have been living on that land for thousands of years are imaginary and made up. But this group of descendants from Central Asian Khazars who converted to Judaism in 800 AD, then migrated to Russia and Europe, then came down to Israel and said, we've created this brand new country called Israel, that they're the real nation. And as people look at this more and more, they begin to realize how incredibly absurd Newt Gingrich was. And now he's stuck. He can't back off. And the harder he pushes on this, the worse he looks. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in depth when we come back from these commercials and news.
Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about this Newt Gingrich pander to Israel and his Jewish backers and the so-called Jewish vote, which isn't really significant because that's only 2% of the population. It's really about the money and about the media. And unfortunately in this country, the media promotes and supports candidates who love Israel, and it will ignore those who don't, Ron Paul being the obvious example in this particular case here. So Newt Gingrich is out there saying that the Palestinians are an invented people, even though they've been living on that piece of ground for thousands of years. He said, well, the Ottomans conquered it, therefore their nation was erased. Well, that also applies to Israel. And he's saying, well, there really is no Palestinian people. They're all transplanted from other places. Well, that's true for the Americans. There's no American race. There's no American language. Are we also an imaginary nation, Mr. Gingrich? I don't think we ought to have a president who thinks the nation he's president of is imaginary. Of course, if his real job is there to serve Israel, then I guess he doesn't really care one way or the other, does he? But in basically putting up this issue, if you really get to the height of absurdity about what is going on, we have a group of people who are not the descendants of the biblical Hebrews, who come from Central Asia, and they come down to Palestine, and they take it saying, we're the people who are supposed to be here, and you that have been living here are not, because there's this invisible man in the cloud up there. And 2,000 years ago, a bunch of people in funny-looking robes wrote down in this parchment that we're supposed to have this place. That's how absurd this whole story is. Because the vast majority of the Jewish population of Israel are what are called Ashkenazi Jews. And they are not genetic descendants of the biblical Hebrews. They are Khazars. And that lily white skin they have is your first giveaway. They're not of Middle Eastern descent. You know, the ancient stories, people who were slaves in Egypt, and, we're talking Africa and Middle East, it's dark-skinned people down there. You get up into Central Asia and the northern latitudes, yeah, then the skin starts to pale out, and that's what you've got here. One of the incredible weird ironies I'm always dealing with, Rivero's a Sephardic name. My ancestors on my father's line, came from Spanish Jewish stock, as it were, and, I have the skin color that is consistent with that. And, when I was married to my first wife, who's Ashkenazi, we'd be standing back, side by side. She was like this lily white person compared to me. The Sephardic are actually descendants of the biblical Hebrews. I have more ancient Hebrew blood in me than Bibi Netanyahu, who has, pretty much none at this point, is what we understand. Remember that big project to get everybody's DNA and build this giant family tree of where we all came from, and how it all of a sudden just kind of went away real quick? Because that's what they kept finding, is all of these Ashkenazi Jews were sending in their DNA, and they'd say, yeah, you're Central Asian. No, I'm not. The rabbi says my ancestors came out of Egypt with Charlton Heston, and Yul Brynner was rude to us, and that's what we believe, and so forth and so on here. Anyway, there's a book out called The 13th Tribe, written by a guy by the name of Kostler, and we have actually two links of it. One is to a PDF that you can download and take with you, and the other is to the book completely online, and basically documents through a lot of ancient research that the Ashkenazi Jewish population, in Russia and in Europe, are the children of converts. And they may not have realized it after about 100 years. But basically, in 800 AD, there was this kingdom called Khazaria, up where Georgia is now. Russian Georgia, not American Georgia. And they wanted to do business with both the Christians and the Muslims. And the only way they could do that, with all of the ongoing conflicts that were heading up to the age of the Great Crusades, is they said, the king of Khazaria said, the official state religion of our kingdom is Judaism. So we can do business with the Christians and we can do business with the Muslims, and we'll make a lot of money and it'll all be kind of fun. And we'll keep out the missionaries from these other two religions, and that will be just fine. And they ran this thing for about 100 years. And after 100 years, probably most of the regular population of Khazaria had really come to believe. They were one of the tribes of Israel that had just sort of wandered up a little further north. So they didn't realize that they were, converts. And then Khazaria fell, and those children of the converted Jewish population migrated into Russia and over to Europe. And that's where the European and the Russian Jews come from. And Kostler makes a very, very strong case of it. And like I said, just looking at the color of their skin, it is obvious they are not descended from any kind of Middle Eastern genetic line here. So it gets back to this absurdity where you have this population who are descendants from people who converted to Judaism in 800 AD. They're not genetically connected to the biblical Hebrews. And they go down into Palestine and say, we're legitimate, we're the real Israel, and all of you Palestinians who've been living here all this time, you're imaginary and made up, you got to get out of here. That is how completely absurd this whole situation has become. And the real absurdity, of course, is why the United Nations original partition plan was not agreed to by all parties. Before the nation of Israel was created, the Jews who were living in that part of the world got along just fine with the Palestinians. Everybody did commerce, which is the pathway to peace. Everybody got along, It's these nutso leaders, whether it's the popes or the imams or the rabbis who are out there screaming blood and God and all the rest of this stuff, and they kick up a real fuss. All these religions are Abrahamic. They all have a common root. I don't know why they can't seem to get along with each other. I'm sure if Abraham came back to life, he believed in an afterlife and ghosts and spirits. If Abraham came back and took a look down, I think he'd be very ashamed at all three of the religions. So, left to themselves, Christians, Jews, and Muslims can get along just fine. It's these hallucinated and fanatical sociopathic wackos that seize power and get up on the TV camera and say, it's a crusade, we must get them out of our historic lands. And we think it's quaint and colorful when we're talking about people having at each other with broadswords. But we're in an age of nuclear weapons. Israel likes to call it the Samson option. They may have the oil, but we have the matches. And it's all bravado, and we've got all these world leaders who are standing around pounding on their chests and bellowing like silverback apes. And they got the keys to the nuclear missiles in their hands. And I think that's probably the reason why so many people are very nervous right now. Because the absolute worst people to be in charge of the earth right now are in a position to destroy it. Yes.